want to welcome everybody this morning. My name is Jessie Roth, and I'm a librarian at Pasadena Public Library's Hill Avenue branch. I'm also joined by Robert Bland, also from the Hill Avenue Library, and Yvonne Savio, Master Gardener. And we're here to welcome you to Saving Seeds Wet and Dry. This is part of our Pasadena Grows gardening programming series. And if you're not already familiar with Pasadena Grows, it's an initiative started out of the Hill Library and managed by the staff, as well as our devoted volunteer, Stephen Smith. The aim, to put it very simply, is to encourage local residents to build gardens and gain knowledge to make them even better. It includes a seed library, which unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic, is currently closed, but once our library buildings reopen, we do hope to also reopen the seed library. And when it's open, what you can do is check out seeds to plant into your own gardens. And we also do a programming series almost every month with different guest presenters to just give you gardening tips and help you be able to create a better garden, create fire-wise gardens, or other things that are relevant to our area, and getting people interested and helping grow their gardening skills. And most importantly, because we are a library, we have a very extensive gardening book collection that is free to check out. Pasadena Public Libraries are offering curbside service, so if you're interested in browsing this collection and checking out books, what you can do is go online, do a search for gardening books, and have those sent to any of the 8 curbside sites for pickup. Since we are closed, our programming has gone virtual. This is our second Pasadena program that we're doing over Zoom. We have 2 more coming up. In 2 weeks on October 3rd, we're doing soil health and planting tips with Tim Wheeler. This is co-sponsored by the Pasadena Water and Power Department. And on November 14th, Yvonne will be joining us again for a fall and winter gardening program. So please keep an eye on our online calendar for when the registration opens for these programs. I can tell you that the October 3rd program registration is already up and available if you'd like to go ahead and register. And of course, the other way to keep in the know about what's going on with Pasadena Grows and our upcoming programs is to be on our email list. So if you're interested, please contact me at my email address, which I'll put in the chat in just a moment. Do not put your email addresses in the chat, but if you email me directly, I can make sure you get on the list. And just a few things Zoom related before we get started. This program is being recorded. We're hoping to make the program available for viewing on the Pasadena Public Library YouTube channel once we get everything cleaned up and edited. It'll also be available on Yvonne Savio's website, Gardening in LA. Also, we're going to be muting everybody's mics except for the presenters during the program, just to make everything clear and so it doesn't get jumbly. So if you have any questions for Yvonne or for me about Pasadena Grows, please put them in the chat and we'll be answering them at the end of Yvonne's presentation. Robert's going to be keeping an eye out for the questions, so hopefully we don't miss any. But again, if there's anything we missed during the program, please feel free to email me and I'll be happy to help you out. Lastly, when you registered for the program, in addition to getting the email that had the Zoom join meeting information, there was a link to a PDF. So if you haven't already caught that, go back over the email and look for the PDF link, because it's got a handout that Yvonne's going to be referring to throughout the presentation. If for any reason you are unable to access this link, or you have trouble opening it, or you didn't get it for some reason, please let me know in the chat and I will try to follow up with you after the program. I may go ahead and just re-email it to everybody at the end, but just in case, just let me know. That's about it for me. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to Yvonne before we get started. So Yvonne Savio grew up on a 3/4 acre hillside lot in Pasadena, growing year-round fruits and vegetables and flowers with lots of manure and compost and making do before it was called recycling or repurposing. She knows what harvested at the perfect moment of ripeness means and enjoys enabling others to enjoy the benefits of growing your own. For 36 years, she's worked with University of California, conferring with statewide vegetable, fruit, and ornamental specialists, then revitalizing the Los Angeles County Master Gardener Volunteer Program, teaching 1,150 Master Gardeners who then served 1.3 million county residents. In 2015, she initiated her website, www.gardeninginla.net, where she blogs every other week or so about what's actually happening in her Pasadena garden, hosts intriguing garden news articles, and invites everyone to submit gardening events and job opportunities open to the public. So without further ado, please welcome Yvonne Savio.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you. I have one of you, your picture, and you've been clapping. So thank you very much for that. Want to thank all of you for joining in. And I did want to say a couple things about my website. The the whole point of it is to have something very specific about my Pasadena garden, which of course is, well, I assume is going to be close to where many of you are located and doing your gardening. However, the real point is to have me say what's going on in my garden so that it makes some sense about what might be happening or not happening in your garden. And consequently, having more of a generic what to do this month kind of column. While I do provide that, I think the real value is having the immediacy of whatever it is that's happening. Like my last blog, I was talking about the concern that several people have expressed to me about whether or not they can eat what's in their garden left, despite this heat wave we had. If there's anything in there, or what they can do with many of those, especially the leafy greens, go ahead and wash it so thoroughly to make sure that it's going to be safe to eat, and whether they should worry about getting any of the ash removed from the garden. So do refer to that. The other couple of things besides the blog that I do is, of course, the monthly tips, but also the web links, which is in 3 separate groups on that page. The University of California, all the links having to do with gardening, other links that are not dealing with the university, but are reputable science-based links of information. And then on the right-hand side of that page is a column that's called Yvonne's Web Appearances. And that's where the link will be for this and other recordings of the Zoom presentations that I've been making. One of the fun things on my website that I love doing is the news page. And that's all sorts of links that articles about horticultural kinds of events, and not events, but concerns, articles that have appeared online that I've posted. So that's kind of, some of those are extremely funny, and some of them are just playtime kinds of things, but just for gardeners. So today we're dealing with saving seeds. And I have a couple of distinctions to make about the kinds of seeds that you will successfully get the plants that you expected to from those seeds, but also the exact process that you have to go through, especially for the wet seeds. So that's why I urge you to have available that the attachment that was the PDF that was sent to you. The other place where this appears with a couple of changes in the actual wording, but the same processes, is on my August 3rd, 2016 blog. That is this, basically this presentation, but a lot more photographs to it as well. Okay. We had visited one of the heirloom farms on the East Coast, and this poster was there of Shaker's Choice Vegetable Seeds. And I just thought this was fascinating because, of course, the Shakers were known for just using the heirloom varieties, because that's all that was available when they were dealing with things. And so it was just fascinating going to that location and that farm. And this was a tiny little house, probably 10 by 10 foot, which was the seed house. And so they had all these items that were piled up, as well as some of the seeds. So down here, you'll barely see in my photograph here, this was a bucket full of peppers that they were going to be seeding. So the distinction I'll make is between wet or dry seeds. Now, the the wet seeds, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, of course, is tomatoes. It's also melons, cucumbers, squash, anything that the interior flesh is very moist and it has lots of what I will officially call gunk around those seeds. You know, when you carve your pumpkin for Thanksgiving and Halloween, all those seeds on the inside, it's very tightly bound by all that flesh, all those strings. So that is what can potentially be problematic, because that gunk is where any viruses that have come along with the pollination of that flower that then becomes the fruit may settle. And consequently, this is not a problem when you're eating this particular fruit, but if you save the seeds and you don't do the fermentation process that I will describe, then those seeds that you are saving potentially can have those viruses attached to the seed and consequently express themselves next year when you plant that seed. And then either the plant won't grow well, or it will be diseased, or the fruits will not set very easily, or whatever number of problems that there can be as a result of those viruses. So all of the wet seed kinds of vegetables, you do have to do the fermentation process, because what's that going to do is get rid, it's literally going to ferment away all of that fibrous material and any of the disease spores and everything else that is right there. Now, dry seeds do not have that fibrous material, that mushy material around the seeds. It's just the seed. So if you think in terms of beans that you've let dry completely, or the peas, or the peppers, the seeds inside, or lettuce, those are all dry seeds. And so this is the easiest way to save the seeds, is from dry vegetables, because all you have to do is pick it when it's thoroughly mature, and then when it's as dry as possible. So then you're just removing the seeds and you have a little bit more of dryness to deal with. But that's the simplest of projects. So hybrid seeds are the ones that are the ones that you cannot, well, you can literally save the seed on them, but those are the ones that will not necessarily come true. And that means they won't bear fruit that is going to be exactly the way the one you're eating, the one that you think you're saving the seeds for. Because just genetically, it has come together and with two separate parents, and the seeds from that will literally split into any number of possibilities again. Many of the different genetic traits will be expressed in that fruit. So you want non-hybrid, which another term, a bit of a different definition, is heirloom, which I think currently is determined or defined as variously 50 or 100 years of coming true every time it's been grown out. And open pollinated means that it can have anything it's open to anybody coming and pollinating it. So when you purchase a seed packet, or you purchase a 6-pack or a 4-inch of vegetables like tomatoes or beans or carrots or whatever it is, look for the discussion on there, the description, that it is non-hybrid or open pollinated or heirloom. Those are all terms that will refer to the fact that those are the ones you can save the seed and then plant them again on your own. So here's the overall process that I will show you has to be done in much larger scale, but I wanted to put it all into one slide. So what's happening here is crushing the fruit, letting it sit outside so it starts to spoil, which is why it gets kind of gunky here. You do that several times. You get rid of most of the flesh that has fermented off. You dry it. You dry it more fully and then pack it away. So what you're getting rid of are any of the chemicals in there that are keeping it from germinating, and also those viruses I had discussed. So here's the entire process. Let me see on the handout here. Now, in order to choose which fruits you're going to, let me go back here, the fruits you're going to choose, you know, you'll taste several tomatoes on a plant or perhaps a couple of melons, and you'll find that this one really tastes good and you'd love to be able to save the seeds for it. It's best if you can let the item, that particular fruit, mature fully, because then it's kind of like having an adult person as opposed to, say, an elementary school kid. Many of these things we pick as immature fruits because that's when we like to eat them the most. But of course, gourds and pumpkins, all the category of winter squash, they're winter because they're going to be saved over many months' time and eaten through the winter. But in fact, they are the mature version of whatever it is. Whereas tomatoes and cucumbers and melons, they're all the immature version, is the one that we prefer to eat. So it's always better, both wet and dry, to let the items mature as fully as possible, just so that all the genetic material in those fruits is as mature as possible. Now, sometimes you may find that you'll open up a melon or even a tomato sometimes, and you'll see that some of the seed has sprouted. So obviously it was viable seed because it already was doing its next step of reproducing itself. But just generally, when you have the choice, let something mature as fully as possible. So the process itself. Now, one other, you notice that each one of these containers, I have a separate name tag because those are each different varieties. If you're going to the effort of saving your seed, it's and you have several different varieties like of tomatoes, it's best to keep them separate because you are going to get a whole batch of seed from each of these fermentation processes. And ultimately, I would assume you are going to want to know which tomato that is. Sometimes we can't tell, you know, between labels that you buy commercially and then they get lost. So you have a mystery tomato on your hands. But as much as you can, let each one of the different batches of your fermentation have its own title so we know what it is. So these containers that I recommend are stainless steel, and they're, the gallon size. Even if you're going to be saving a smallish portion, you are going to want to have as much water as possible in this, and consequently, the larger container is going to be a better receptacle for you to do this process. So in this case, I took probably 5 or 6 tomatoes of that variety off of that plant and mushed them up. Now, this is by hand. What you're doing is just breaking down some of the cell structure of that tomato or the squash or cucumber or whatever it is. You're just kind of, mushing it yourself with your hand. And then you're filling the container almost to the rim with water so that it's much more diluted. So here, this is kind of what it will look like, and it will start to ferment. You see all of this gucky white and gray and black stuff. Oh, I forgot to remind you to put it outside, away from windows and doors, because when it starts this fermentation process, it's going to get pretty stinky. And you won't want to be having that wafting in all evening as you're trying to watch TV or sleep or something. So put it as far away as possible. And in the sun, if you can manage it, just because that's going to heat all of this up and really initiate and proceed with the fermentation much more easily. So what you do is mush it all up, fill it with water, let it sit. It'll start to be all gunky like this. Some of the water will get to look, as stuff settles to the bottom, it is potentially going to be the viable seed. Any of the seed and all the flesh that floats on the top is to be gotten rid of. That is, once you've mashed everything up and squeezed it all up, and it started to get that brew look with all the gunk to it, after a day or two, when it looks mucky like this, you just scoop all that off. And you can put that in the compost pile and pour off as much of the water as you can. And then you'll repeat that process a couple times until you get no more fermentation. And this is all just the seed that's at the bottom of the container here, but that the water stays pretty clear. That's when you know, and that could be 3-4 different processes where you dump off the gucky stuff, you fill it with water again, you put it back outside for a couple days, and then finally it's clear enough, the water, so that you know the whole process is complete. So at that point, go ahead and put it in a colander so that it drains most of it out. It's looking more like this. This is still when it has a lot of flesh to it here. So from here, you'll dump it all out into the colander, and you'll have just the seeds here, which then you put onto a plate. And now this is a plastic plate or a china plate or glass. You do not want to use a paper plate, because as the seed dries, it will stick to the paper, and when you remove it, it'll pull up a piece of the paper. And you don't need that because you want it to be drying completely, not potentially have still a little bit of the moisture held by that piece of paper. So take several days, and this you can be having inside the house, out of the sun. And just after a couple days, you see there's some clumps of the seeds in here. Just go in there with your hand and break those apart. And then ultimately you'll have a lot of clear seed, and that's what you'll go ahead and package up and label. Okay. So that's the wet seeds. Robert, is there anyone that has a question on the wet seed process?
As a reminder, everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will read them to Yvonne. We don't have any questions so far, but if you think of any, please put them in the chat.
Okay, then we'll move on to the dry. Now, as I had said before, this is really the most simple process because you're literally just waiting for it to be dry, and then you're harvesting it, and then you're all set for next time. So you do want to let it be as mature as possible. Whereas your tomatoes and your wet seeds, you may or may not let them mature as completely as possible. But for dry seed, you absolutely have to do that, because any moisture that is left in this seed, excuse me, any moisture that's left in this seed is going to literally spoil it. And it's going to mold or rot or something, and then potentially that will destroy that entire batch of seed that you're storing with it. So this is lettuce here, and you'll see that there are batches of different varieties of lettuce just because of the difference in the foliage here. And all of this, this entire bed was planted at the same time with all these different varieties. And so you'll see that we're still very much eating off of this variety, but these have long since bolted, gone to seed. And so each one of these little tendrils going up is going to have a little tiny daisy kind of flower at the top. It's probably not even, well, each of those flowers is probably a quarter the size of your little fingernail. They are very, very tiny. So in your garden, you may be dealing with each of the different varieties at a different rate, because like this one is now just going to seed. It hasn't started to bloom yet. And whereas these we're still eating. Now, one trick to figuring out when to stop harvesting to eat is that as the lettuce plant starts to grow taller, to elongate, it's best for you to taste a leaf of that plant before you harvest the whole thing, because each variety of lettuce will mature at a different rate, and it will get bitter at a different rate. And some of us like more bitter than others, so that's one consideration to make. You know, a very personal choice on your part whether to pick it or not. And if once it gets to the point, and a reminder that even within each variety, like just with this batch of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plants, each plant is going to mature a little bit differently. So you may still be able to harvest off of this plant, but this one starts bolting and going to seed sooner, and it gets bitter before this one will. So each plant is its individual time schedule and flavor schedule that you may or may not want to harvest, because there's nothing worse, I think, than having a whole bowl full that you've harvested and you put the dressing on it, and then you start having these bitter bits in there that just taste terrible, and you just don't want to have to pick apart your salad. You want to do that ahead of time so you know that the whole salad is going to taste wonderful. So as it starts to bolt and put up these seed stalks, once you see one of the flowers up top here, little yellow flowers, that's when you want to get the 5-gallon paper bag and tie it around. See, it's tied right at the base here. Tie it around the stalk so that the rest of all of those flowers, as they blossom and then as they set their seed, they won't be just scattering all that seed all in this whole area. It'll all be right in that paper bag. Now, the next step in collecting this seed is that you wait until the stalk is absolutely completely dry. And by that I mean you just grab it here, and if you wiggle it back and forth and it still stays in one piece, then it's not thoroughly dry. If you bend this over and it snaps off, that's completely dry. So don't rush this at all. It absolutely has to be completely dry. Now, you can keep it all in this bag and just stuff it in the garage or in a back closet, whatever kind of dry, moderate temperature place you have. And you can completely crush it flat, but just to get it out of your way. And then later in the fall, like another month from now, when it cools down a bit, theoretically, that's when you can just take handfuls of the stuff and toss it out into your garden. You don't have to remove all of the plant material that is now completely dried. You'll just use that as a little bit of mulch along with the seeds as they go out. So those two slides are the lettuce. Now, onions and leeks form this cute little top knot that has black seeds in there. And again, if you want to put a bag over it so it holds them, but those seeds pretty much stay on their little stalks inside there until you want to harvest the entire little puffball into a bag and then sow the seed at a later time. Beans, of course, these beautiful colors, you let the beans dry until, again, they're absolutely crispy. This is what a carrot head looks like. And of course, it's a wonderful attractant for bees and beneficial insects. So this is a great thing to grow with kids, because they can see that entire process of sowing the seed, growing the plant, what the plant looks like, what part of the plant you end up eating, letting it bolt, go to seed, and any flower like this that it makes, and then how it actually sets the seed. So they see the entire process. This is a wonderful poster that I had of all these different kinds of ancient varieties of corn. And then, of course, chili peppers. And any of you who have traveled to the Southwest will see these chili pepper Wreath hanging everywhere. And it's literally just stringing them together and letting them hang until they are completely dry. And that's it. Eat your yard. So again, my website on August 3rd, 2016 goes through this whole process, and that PDF goes through the process as well, all of these points that I've made. So does anybody have any questions?
So Yvonne, we do have 3 questions in the chat. I'll just read them in order. From BJ, he was asking, what are the beautiful bean seeds?
Oh, aren't those marvelous? I don't know what the varieties are. This was a photograph I had gotten off of the web just because of the exquisite colors. But I'm sure if you Google heirloom seed varieties, it'll have a tremendous number of these, because certainly some of the seed companies specialize in the heirloom seeds, you know, including many of the beans that were utilized by many of the indigenous people tribes in hot lands.
Okay, our next question is from Claudia. What's the best way to save papaya seeds? Is it considered a wet seed?
I'm sorry, papaya seeds?
Yeah, the best way to save them, and is it considered a wet seed?
It definitely is wet, because if you open it up, it's wet in there. It's pretty basic. It's not a theoretical kind of debate thing. If it's wet, it's wet. Now, a friend of mine who, in the Master Gardener program, he used to get different kinds of papayas from his different farmers markets that he would go to, where there were lots of folks from different countries in Central and South America. And consequently, there was many more kinds of papayas than we have. And he started the seeds from each one of them and then shared plants with many of us. So it's just a wet seed in there. So you just go through the same process with the wet seed, the fermentation. Now, this isn't to say that it's all seeds have got viruses in them and that you have to ferment them. Certainly, the first proof to me that compost was a good thing was because in January at our little house that we rented up in Altadena, I had built a compost pile, and in January we had tomatoes starting to germinate and come out in the compost pile. So I left them there and continued to pile mulch around it, you know, in the adding to the compost pile, and water it. And we ended up having the best tomatoes we've ever eaten in our lives. So of course that proved to me that that had not gone through this fermentation process, or maybe it had, it was just in the middle of the compost pile. So anything that you start that is a wet seed, if you have things coming up in your compost pile, or you just open up a tomato and it has some of those seeds that are already germinated in there, there's little sprouts in there, go ahead and plant them up and see what happens, but just label them so that you know that that was an unfermented process that it went through. And consequently, if it starts to exhibit any problems, that you remove it completely and throw that into the trash because it may, so that it doesn't spread to anything else in your garden.
Okay, and again from BJ, I read that onion seeds don't keep well. Is this true?
Yes, onion seeds are good only for about a year. And consequently, you know, some things like corn, they had found corn that was literally 10,000 years old and it germinated. So the whole gamut of different kinds of vegetables, each has their own different rate of that they'll continue to be viable. However, you know, many of us, especially lettuce packets, have so many seeds in them. And consequently, you tend to hold those packets over several years' time. And just out of, you know, not wanting to throw away something that potentially is viable, even though it's several years old. So what I generally do is I'll just scatter that seed, a batch of the seed, when the temperatures lower down, because in this kind of heat, the lettuce seed has a hormone in it that keeps it from germinating. And all seeds have that. It's just that we tend to hit it right on when we finally get some germination. But my point here is with seed that may be a couple years old, make a point of scattering a bunch of it, just as if you're really starting it. But you may find that only half of them germinate, or maybe a quarter. And that way you'll, I do this with my peas every year too. I will start a batch of seeds, well, probably in another 2 weeks or a month. Once I've prepped my soil and let it mature for a couple weeks, then I'll go ahead and put the seeds in. But I really won't be surprised if very many of them don't come up. And then I'll just 2 weeks later, I'll put in another batch of seeds, just because knowing that if the packets are a couple years old, the viability rate will have gone down. And so just scatter it more than you would normally. And hopefully you'll still get enough to have been worth the effort and saving that seed.
Our next question is from Thomas. I have saved seeds from a chili without letting the chili dry. It's a fairly rare type. Is it worth attempting to use the seeds?
Absolutely. It's always worth going ahead. I remember on several occasions, you know, even botanical gardens, they'll end up getting 4 seeds of something, and they'll try various methods, and hopefully within those 4 seeds, they will have figured out what the magic is to get that particular plant to germinate. So absolutely try it. But again, if it ends up, because it's dry seed, it's really going to be a matter of the maturity of that, you know, whether it's a mature enough seed to come up with a fully developed plant that, you know, will produce the chilies that you're looking for.
We have another question from Claudia. What if you accidentally do wet process on seeds that should be dry process? Are they still viable?
Yeah, I think there shouldn't be a problem. I don't think it's going to mean that it gets rotted or anything. Did you have a particular vegetable in mind?
She says she accidentally did it to peppers.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, part of its drying down is that it is shutting down, so that if it ends up being in water, that you may be inadvertently getting it to germinate because it's starting to absorb the water. And the bit of acidity because of the fermentation process, I don't think is going to end up harming it at all.
All right, thank you. And are there any other questions out there as we wrap up? Let's give it a moment to see if any come through the chat.
Well, I did have one reminder I wanted to make about my website. You're certainly welcome to go visit the website at any point, but if you do want to receive notices of when I put the new blog up, or when I put a new news item up, or a job opportunity, or a garden event, that is when you should subscribe to me. And that way I'll send you the notice as soon as I put those items up. And certainly the garden events at this point are pretty much just online webinars. So I think there's about 10 or more events. I think it's 10 job opportunities, but it's considerably more events that are posted on my website. So please do go take a look at those. There was a question about pole beans.
Sorry, can you plant pole beans now?
No, the beans are basically a warm season crop. And well, let's see, this is what, mid, well, it's the end of September. If you, beans are going to be at least 2.5, 3 months maturity. So I always recommend that at the beginning of September, that people plant the last of the summer stuff, the things that thrive during the hot weather, but also the first of the cold season stuff. Because then when whatever happens with the weather, which of course we never know, you'll end up with something to eat, whichever way it went. So, but most beans are going to be a good 2.5 months maturity. And I would assume, again, assuming that if you planted beans now, you really, especially pole beans, which take longer to develop than bush beans, it'll be too chilly by the time that they should have been blossoming and setting the fruit. So just hold that seed until next year, and you can start planting it pretty early, like even February, March, in the hopes that it might get hot sooner, and therefore you'll have an early crop rather than struggling with a late crop now.
All right, any other questions for Yvonne before we wrap things up?
Okay, go out there and get gardening once you can breathe. I mean, this smoke thing, I noticed this morning that at our house, it's considerably smoky just walking around. So I would not recommend going out into the garden, certainly without a mask, and doing any real exertion, because it's just not safe for you to be heavily breathing this stuff. But you can be starting it indoors and, you know, deciding exactly what items to purchase at the nurseries, and both seeds and plants, and then have them acclimating, the plants acclimating in your garden. And then once it does clear up more from the fires, then being able to get them into the ground or into containers. So there's always something you can be doing no matter what the weather is doing.
So we do have a question from Claudia. Will you be doing other workshops, for instance, Here we go. How to grow seeds indoors, lighting needs, etc.
Go to my website and under events, under the submit events, there's a whole list of the workshops, well, the online Zoom presentations that I will be doing, and also other people's workshops as well. At this point, my container gardening workshop, I think, is not scheduled, but it is by any group, but it is on the web links page under my appearances. There is a previous presentation I made that was recorded and I posted there. So at least the container gardening part avenue you can observe on there. I don't deal much with lighting. It's indoors. It's just give it as much as you possibly can. And when the little seedlings start leaning toward the window, that means they need to be turned around so that they will grow straighter. And if you can, give them a lot more light.
And as a reminder, Yvonne will be joining us again in November for a fall and winter planting workshop. And we've actually had Yvonne for other programs in the past, and we will certainly be bringing her back in the future. And again, please go to the library's website and check out our events calendar to see other programs that we have coming up. So if there are no more questions, Yvonne, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to present this workshop today. And I hope everybody got a lot out of it, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and we hope to see you in a couple weeks for our next Pasadena Grows program. Bye-bye.
Bye.